Welcome back to another episode of the Partnernomics Show. We've been asked by a lot of our business owners, executives, clients of Partnernomics to bring on more coaches, consultants, advisors, different folks that are focused on business growth and bringing those folks onto the Partnernomics Show, kind of sharing some of their insights. I know I've talked about this a lot, but this is an amazing book. It's called Traction, and is written by Gino Wickman. And before I started Partnernomics, is probably 11 years ago or so, I would say, a friend of mine turned me on to the book. And I had been a chief operating officer at a national software company, education software company. And so I love business operations. I love process. And this book was just set out in such a logical manner. It was super cool to see. It was almost kind of like decoding small, medium-sized business operations. And it was the first time I had seen that, even after going through a business operations PhD program. Never seen anything structured quite like this that was meant to be implemented. And it certainly gave me a lot of inspiration and motivation to build out the Partnernomics methodology and the different frameworks that we use. But over the coming weeks and months, I want to bring on some different coaches, consultants, advisors that are focused on business growth and have them share their insights with us. And so today I brought on Jon Weening, and John's an awesome dude up there in Canada. He's a certified EOS implementer. So there's different levels of implementers. And so he's worked with a lot of different companies, helping them grow. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I certainly enjoyed talking with Jon and plan to have him back on the show later this year. So hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Welcome to the Partnernomics Show, where industry thought leaders discuss the hottest topics in partnerships, ecosystems, and innovation.
Welcome back to another episode of the Partnernomics Show. It's great to be with you today. Today we are joined by Jon Weening. So Jon is a certified EOS implementer, actually in Canada. And Jon and I had an opportunity to meet recently. Love his background, love his passion for business growth. And Jon, it's great to have you on the show today. How are things going?
Things are great, Mark, and it's great to be on here. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you carving out some time to chat with us and our listeners and share a little bit about your background and what you do. We're trying to get more coaches, advisors, consultants, those sorts of things on the show and kind of chatting about different strategies that entrepreneurs, executives, founders are leveraging these days to grow their organization. So I certainly appreciate you sharing your insights. But Jon, as we kick off here, man, I'd love to just have you share, if you would, for a few minutes. I mean, tell us a little bit about Jon. What's your background? How long have you been an EOS implementer? Is it something you've been doing since EOS's inception, or something that you've recently gotten into?
Yeah, so I've been an EOS implementer for 5.5, coming up on 6 years. Prior to becoming an EOS implementer in August 2019, I had been an owner or partner in 5 different businesses over about a 22 or 23 year period. Always some of those successful, some of them not so much. And so, but all of them great learning opportunities. And so most of my time was spent in a custom equipment design and manufacturing company that I had owned with a couple of my brothers. Joined that business as a partner in about 2004, kind of took over what in EOS we call the visionary role. So running the business in 2008, and then over about a 10-year period, we grew that business about 7x. And through the process, as a family-run business, right, with me and a couple of my brothers, we had bought out one of my brothers who was a partner in the business earlier on, and so it was 2 of us that owned it. And through the process of implementing a system, we realized we just weren't on the same page. And so 4 or 5 years of honestly struggling to really get on the same page with a vision for the future. And then we just came to the realization that we just couldn't get on the same page. And so we decided to part ways. We sold off part of the business. He still runs it today. My son just started working with him back in September, which is kind of cool because I didn't see that coming back 6 years ago. ultimately, we're both happy. He's running the business more in line with what he had in mind. And I had kind of lost my passion really for the industry that we were in. And I was looking for something different. And so it freed me up. He bought me out. It freed me up to ultimately pursue a passion of helping other business owners. And so much of what helped in terms of us growing, putting the right team in place, so much of that is part of what we teach through the EOS process. And so it's just the last 5.5 years, super passionate about helping other business owners implement EOS and some simple practical tools.
That's awesome. There's my dad and his brothers and his father owned a dump trucking and excavating company in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s in Kansas City, where I live. And so it's interesting, the family business. My mom also owned a business with my aunt as a co-owner. And so it definitely adds an additional elements to the business, but it really goes back to kind of underscore, what you're talking about, kind of the vision for what you want the company to be and the importance of having an aligned vision. And it's, I guess a decision to part ways or whatever the case may be. I mean, that's a really positive thing. It's something that you kind of have to get behind. I know vision is one of the big components of EOS. John, if you would, let's just kind of dive into, what EOS is. I remember in conversation that you and I had earlier, a business mentor of mine gave me the book Traction that I have over here on my shelf. Probably, I'd say around 10 years ago or so. I was actually a little bit more than that because it was before I started Partnernomics. And, I cruised through it and, fell in love with it. It just made sense to me. I'm very process oriented and I loved the framework. Would you mind sharing a little bit of the EOS, the 6 components of what those are, and just kind of share with folks that might not be familiar with the book Traction or the Entrepreneur Operating System?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, so just before I dive into that, it was interesting. Just last week, we had our EOS Worldwide Conference down in Washington, D.C., and it was really cool. Gino Wickman, the creator of EOS, he kicked us off with his keynote, and what he was doing, he was talking about 10 obsessions that really were instrumental in his journey from bringing on the second EOS implementer back in, I don't know, it's probably 2004. And then really his journey of building EOS worldwide from 2008 to 2018, when he ultimately sold most of the business at that time. And so ultimately what EOS is, it stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And so when you say that, a lot of people think they go to like a computer operating system, and it's not. It's a people operating system. And so every business runs on some sort of system. Usually it's the input founder name, Bob, Sue, George operating system. And so EOS, it's just generic entrepreneurial operating system. And you mentioned it, at the heart of EOS is your business. And then there's 6 key components. And so Gino, it was through a discovery process working with companies that truly were great companies, but he, through the process of working with them early on, realized that to the extent they could strengthen 6 key components of their business, then everything else kind of just falls into place. And so those 6 components are the vision component, ultimately getting aligned and on the same page with a vision and a plan on how to achieve it. The people component is about getting right people in the right seats. It's a term that Jim Collins coined, and we use a lot in EOS. And so we can talk a little bit more about that.
Good to great. And other books?
Yeah. I think I got behind me on a shelf there. Good to great.
Yeah, I see it.
The data component, which ultimately is about just running your business on objective information. So often entrepreneurial businesses are run on feelings and emotions. And so really looking at, there's one of my favorite quotes that we use often when implementing EOS is from Jim Barksdale, former owner of Netscape. And he said, if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. And ultimately, it's really what we all probably think, right? And so it's good to have some good solid data. And so the 4th component is the issues component. So it's about just getting really good at solving issues at the root, setting them up, making them go away forever. The 5th one is the process component. And so that's about, I always like to correlate it to creating a franchise model for your unique independent business. It's the way
Myth Revisited. I don't see Michael Gerber's book back there.
No, it's not back there, but I'm a big fan of Michael Gerber's.
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, Gino that's one of the people he credits ultimately to the creation of the EOS model. And so, yeah, E-Myth Revisited, if you haven't read that book, it's a great book too. It's all about creating, processes and systems in your business so that it ultimately runs smoothly, creates it scalability, ultimately makes running the business more fun and usually more profitable, which everybody likes. And then the sixth component, the final component, is what we call the traction component. And that's the name of the book. Traction is the playbook for running on EOS. And traction's about bringing that vision down to the ground, really executing on it and bringing it to life. And so it's one of the cool things as an EOS implementer. We always say that we're not consultants. So we're teachers, facilitators, coaches, teaching that system. And then it's the team, the leadership team that we're working with that ultimately makes that vision a reality and brings it to life. And so it's so cool to watch that happen over, typically it's a 2 to 3 year journey that we're working with the client, and then they run on their own and take it from there and off. So one of the things we teach is a long-term 10-year target or core target if it's not 10 years, but it's so cool to see teams just progressing quarter by quarter, year by year, ultimately to achieve that vision. So in a nutshell, that's what EOS is.
So, Jon, you mentioned, I'll put you on the spot here and test your memory a little bit. I'm thoroughly intrigued by this, but you mentioned that Gino, the founder of EOS, said that there was, I believe, 10 things that he was kind of obsessing about as he was building the company. What are some of those 10? Any of those that you recall that kind of jump out at you? I'm fascinated to know what some of those might be.
Yeah, so one of them is 10-year thinking. So thinking long term. So often it's so easy to get caught up in the weeds and in the short term problems and challenges. But yeah, keeping that long term vision in front of you. He built EOS on 10-year thinking. I'm just listening to one of his newest books. It's called Shine, and in there he talks about 10 disciplines. And one of the disciplines that he talks about in there as well is 10-year thinking. And so just thinking in decades, a decade flies by so fast, and people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. And so that's one of the things. It was all about keeping ultimately the right people in the right seats, building the right team around him. And so it was cool to see. I got to witness that evolve and change over the years. But he started out with Don Tinney, his very first business partner, and building that from just the two of them to hiring their first employee to I think it was about 50 or 60 people when he sold EOS in 2018. And so really, really just focusing on getting the right people in the right seats. And so we can talk a little bit more about what that means, but those are two that come to mind.
Yeah, Jon, I would love to dig into that because whenever I'm talking to founders and we talk about the importance of setting that long-term vision, I'm trying to remember which other author mentioned microscopes and telescopes and the importance of, looking at, kind of this quarter, looking at the short term, but then also having this North Star that you're driving towards. And I'm a firm believer in both of those. But there's been a number of times when I talk about kind of this longer term vision, and I've even shared, traction shares 10 years, you kind of get laughed at. People are like, oh my God, I just look backwards the last 5 years. That was before COVID. It's like, man, the world has changed so much in just 5 years. What are you talking about, this 10-year view? Talk to us a little bit about that, kind of this short term, but then long term and the balance. And is 10 years too long? Or what's your philosophy on that?
Well, it's interesting. If you've read Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about in there that the best companies, ultimately, they always had what he referred to as a BHAG, so a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it was usually like 25 years or maybe even longer than that. And so what we found is that the world's moving so fast, people have a hard time thinking that far out. And so even 10 years is sometimes too long. When I'm in the second session that we're working together with the team, we're building out their vision traction organizer. And one of the questions we ask them is, what does this company look like 10 years from now? And some of them prefer looking 7 years or maybe even 5 years. But it's so important to have that North Star. And oftentimes what teams get hung up on is the how. How are we going to do this? One of my favorite stories about the 10-year target, it actually comes from EOS Worldwide. And so when Gino and Don, his partner, started this thing together, they created a 10-year target to have 10,000 companies running on EOS with the help of an EOS implementer. And at the time, there was like 50 companies. So they had no idea like how they were going
That's
to
a
do
big,
that.
hairy, audacious goal, right?
It is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so they had no idea how they were going to do that when they set that target. But what's so cool, and so in their case, it was by 2020, or maybe it was in 2020. I can't remember exactly, but I remember as EOS implementers celebrating that when we hit 10,000 companies, and it happened like November of the year of the target. So it was literally within weeks of when they had targeted to hit that number. And so the reality is you don't have to know how you're going to make that vision a reality. You got a long time, right? You got 20, no, what is it? I should know this, 120 quarters. Does that make sense? No, 10 years, 40 quarters. You got 40 quarters to ultimately bring it to life if it's 10 years, right? And so, so you don't have to know all the details about how you're going to do it, but having that long-term vision is so key. And what oftentimes companies miss too is the importance of getting that shared by their whole team.
Yeah.
If you got big growth plans, the best people on your team that are growth oriented, they're looking for opportunities, right? And so if they don't know where you're going, then they got to find somewhere else to work in order to achieve their own goals and aspirations, right? So sometimes, yeah, I've had business owners who are like, I don't think the frontline workers really care about the vision. The reality is some of them do. Maybe some of them don't, but the reality is some of them do, and you're going to keep better people around.
Yeah, another thing that I believe in, I learned this in the Marines, is, you know, having the common vision and understanding what the vision is, having people bought into that, going to some Patrick Lencioni work, is it becomes the yardstick for decisions that are being made, right? If you had an organization, there's 10 people, 100 people, 10,000 people. I mean, just multiply that by how many ever, and that's how many decisions are being made each day, right? So
Totally.
then you have your, you know, your vision that the company is driving towards. Certainly values is a huge piece of this as well, that
Values
also
so
play
important.
into those decisions that are being made. So that's a way that helps me kind of wrap my head around it, the
Yeah.
importance of getting the alignment.
Yeah. You mentioned values. I wouldn't mind chatting a little bit about that. When we talk about the people component, right people, right seats, it's one of the things that I am most passionate about when working with teams to implement EOS. And the reason is because it was so impactful in my own business prior to this. I, as most entrepreneurs, I worked my butt off 6 days a week, had 4 young kids at home, and in 2008 found myself, I don't share this often, but ultimately found myself in a situation where was about to lose my marriage, and it was a big wake-up call for me. And so fast forward 7 years from there, 6 or 7 years, we were going through a core values discovery exercise. And one of the values that rose to the top for us, and I'm not saying it's right for everyone, but one of the values that rose to the top for us was family before work. And so we had a team, lots of young dads. We were a manufacturing company. We did fabrication and welding and whatnot. And so we had lots of young dads with families at home. And so it's not that we didn't request or require them to work overtime sometimes, but we always were keeping in mind that, hey, family has to come before work. And so trying to work with people on that. And so where it really came to light was about a year after we had kind of discovered these values. We had one of our key people. He was a fantastic worker, always willing to put in extra time. He was the go-to guy when you had after-hour service work. But ultimately, what we realized is that anybody that didn't want to put in 60 hours a week, he just kind of looked down or was judging. And so it was hurting the morale in our company. And so we ultimately agreed to part ways. And it was like a breath of fresh air, and everybody else steps up when you remove somebody who does not fit your culture, who doesn't share those core values. And so when we talk about right people in the right seats, right people, they fit your core values. They live them, they breathe them, they're excited about them. And what's really important, you'll notice that I mentioned discovering your core values. It's because they exist in every business and they're unique. And you have to go through a discovery thinking about who are our best people and what do they value and what characteristics are we really looking for as we build this team up? So super
Yeah, I
passionate
mean,
about that.
they're there. It's just a matter of discovering what they are and then deciding that it's right. Because
Totally.
sometimes
Yeah.
there's core values certainly inside of companies where we're like, this probably isn't something that we want as a core value. Might need to make some adjustments on that.
Yeah. Pat Lencioni had a Harvard Review article, and he talked about the values traps, and so we actually talk about this with teams when we're going through that discovery exercise. One of them is permission to play values, and so you got to filter your values to, are they permission to play? Because if they are, they're probably not really true values. And so some examples of that I see all the time: integrity, teamwork, hard work, whatever. They're just, you can have a value integrity, but does it really set you apart? Like, what company would say that they don't value integrity? So it's just making it meaningful, really unique to your organization. And so make sure that they're not permission to play, that they're not aspirational, that you're not defining what you wish you were. These got to be who you are as a company, right? And so,
John, I love having conversations like this, man. I wasn't planning on spitting out so many books, man, but this has been fun. I wrote down Built to Last. That's another Jim
another
Collins
good.
and Porras book. I had the opportunity to interview Jerry Porras several years ago. It was
Oh,
a
that's amazing.
fun conversation. And what's so interesting, right? That book, to kind of summarize it, really is about setting the vision for an organization and sticking true to that. Well, that book has been out for a long time. I can't remember when it was published, but I'm going to kind of throw out there, I don't know, 15, 20 years, somewhere around
Yeah.
there. And the darling of that book, or one of them, is Southwest. Well, look at the challenges it's having now, and new CEO change, years ago, and perhaps companies companies can sort of lose their way. They sort of lose the vision, and just kind of underscores the importance of that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
So
I
go
think
ahead.
actually, I think that is the book where they do talk about the BHAG, maybe not good to great.
Yep,
So
they
I've read both of
definitely.
them a couple times, so I sometimes get it mixed
Yeah,
up with.
it's certainly put into Built to Last a couple different times. I'm trying to remember back
Yeah.
to other books that's out there. But John, one last question for you. This is something I'm kind of interested with your background and different businesses that you've been in. And that was before your EOS days and before you understood EOS. As you kind of reflect back on the businesses that you had and ran, what are some of the components of EOS that you teach that you think would have been the biggest needle movers for you if you would have been exposed to the EOS framework 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because when I read Traction, my first thought was, where was this for the last 10 years of my life? It just was. I didn't actually mention this, and I won't go into detail, but so we had implemented a similar but different system in our business. And so I actually read Traction probably 4 or 5 months after exiting my last business. And I was piecing together my own thing. And when I read Traction, I just scrapped it. And I was like, where has this been? It's amazing. It's simple.
I
And so
know.
I think your question was, what aspects of it did I wish that I knew earlier on?
Yes. Which of kind of the 6 components, or from like
Yeah.
just the things that you teach, which of those would have been the biggest needle mover for you if you would have read Traction, let's say 10 or 15 years earlier, even though it
So
didn't
the two,
exist?
yeah. So one I've already touched on, but hit it home again. It is the people component. And so the importance of getting the right people on the team and getting them in the right seats. And so that means they get it, want it, and have capacity to do the job really well. And so the mistake I see made most often with teams is waiting too long to deal with wrong people, whether it's because they're in the wrong seat or because they're not a right fit. Waiting too long. I never hear a team say when they've let someone go, oh, I wish we had waited to do that. But I often hear, man, we should have done that sooner. And so that's the number one thing. And so having that framework of core values earlier on, and really even that getting crystal clear on the right seat aspect of that. So I wish I knew that. And the other one I think is the meeting pulse that we teach through EOS. There's so much of it, but that meeting pulse, we meet quarterly with all of our clients for one full day. And the reality is, human nature is, we focus tends to fray. We're not on the same page. our priorities aren't aligned. And so getting together quarterly with the leadership team is huge. And then, ultimately that is how it's part of the traction component, right? To achieve that long-term vision. So
That's
those are the
great
two that come to mind.
insights. Great insights. John, I feel like we could go Joe Rogan style and go for about another 3 or 4 hours, man. I've got so many topics I'd love to discuss with you. We're going to have you back on the show if you'd be willing to.
Yeah, happy to. I could talk about this for hours. So
awesome. John, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on all the awesome work that you're doing as a certified implementer, and continued success.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Partnernomics Show. Don't forget to subscribe to get the newest episodes at thepartnernomicsshow.com.